inside their brain, you can literally see religion at work, and you can get a sense of what religion is about from watching it actually being practiced. So we can observe cultures that are engaging in religious traditions, telling religious narratives, teaching children, and engaging in other sorts of these forms of religious expression and practice. Again, clumsy, and we can come up with even more subdivisions and so forth, but this will be our approach. Starting off with brain cognition, neuroscientists can discover fascinating correlations between the patterns of activity of neurons in parts of your brain with what it's like to undergo particular experiences. The level of detail and focus is now becoming astonishing. In certain laboratories around the world, it has become possible to watch your brain very carefully and tell whether you are thinking about a cow or a pig, whether you're looking at the letter A or looking at the letter B. So your neurons have characteristic patterns of activity when you're doing different kinds of things. Not surprising. And the brain and cognitive sciences can find these correlations. Now, the question is, what does this have to do with religion? Our religious experiences and the characteristic patterns of neuron activity associated with them, can these correlations tell us anything possibly about the validity of these sorts of religious experiences? Can it tell us, for example, something about what it's like to experience God or something paranormal? Now, for naturalism, on the other hand, the worldview that says that we're limited to discussing and discovering the natural world only, experiences uncorrelated with any detectable neural change would indeed truly be a problem, right? I mean, if people were undergoing intense religious experiences and there was no detectable correlation of change in the brain didn't seem to change hardly at all under these intense experiences, that would be a severe problem for naturalism, because of course naturalism believes that brain is responsible for mind. If you had mind doing things and the brain wasn't doing anything, then it would be far easier to infer that there must be something supernatural as a cause or a linkage or something supernatural about the mind. The fact that instead there are tight correlations is something that naturalism would both predictably expect and hence would argue then that there can be no aid or comfort given to supernaturalism simply because there are those correlations. Now this is of course only the start of an argument, and if people are interested in the question and answer period, we can pursue this question further. Does our ability to track brain changes when people are having religious experiences lend any support to the idea of whether it's purely natural or there might be something supernaturally involved? And that's an interesting question for psychology of religion. I've given you a hint of an argument that correlations might be neutral towards religious belief. For example, the argument could be given that brain changes in and of themselves are not capable of verifying any object of belief. In other words, if I'm currently undergoing the experience of believing that there's a ham sandwich in front of me, and a neuroscientist says, yep, it sure looks like he's thinking about a ham sandwich in front of him, does that prove that there actually is a ham sandwich in front of me? Well, no, actually there'd be a gap there, right? I could be thinking and even believing that there is a ham sandwich in front of me. I could be even thinking that I'm seeing a ham sandwich in front of me. There would be the correlative brain experience, but all of that in and of itself is not sufficient. It might be indicative, but it's not sufficient to prove that there's an actual ham sandwich. In fact, if you think about it, the way psychology usually works best is first you put an actual ham sandwich in front of somebody and then see what happens to their brain as they process that, both cognitively and in fact perhaps emotionally as well. I want to eat that ham sandwich. So the usual thing to do is to know that you have an object out there and then to watch the brain processing perception of it and thinking about it and perhaps acting upon it, like eating it. what psychology usually doesn't do is just watches the correlations without any sort of external object. That's it's not that psychology can't deal with it, but it's a little bit out of its pay grade, if you follow me. And so that's another reason why I think just finding these correlations is not enough to prove that God exists. Okay. Let me give a little bit of a detailed argument for people in the back. You may not be able to read it, and I apologize for that. But I'm just going to go through this real quick, and then if we get back on this subject, I can bring this back up again if you would like some details, or people can move up closer if there's an empty chair. What I'm interested in is the fact, of course, that premise number one clearly is true. When people report unusual experiences, their brains undergo abnormal episodes, right? You can watch those sorts of correlations. Premise 3 says, when brains undergo abnormal episodes, their causes are entirely internal to the body or triggered by an outside natural stimulus. Now that actually is a controversial premise, that third one there. I'm not claiming that it's true, but it's a candidate for truth. It might be true. Just 1 and 3 by themselves could give the appearance of supporting very nicely the conclusion. And the conclusion there reads, no external God is the cause of an unusual experience. Because we don't need to resort to anything supernatural, the causes of these abnormal episodes are either entirely internal to the nervous system, or it has to do with some relationship between the internal nervous system and something external stimulating it or triggering it or causing a perception of it or something like that. Now, propositions 2 and 4 are the missing links. If you actually wanted to construct something like a sound and valid logical deduction, where are my logic students? I know a couple of you have been taking logic, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4 approach a valid argument, and then we could ask whether the premises are true. But 2 and 4 usually don't go unstated. However, they should be. 2 reads, the character of any experience is entirely determined by the properties of the brain episode correlated with that experience. Now you would need that premise number 2 in order to fill in the logical gaps between 1 and 3 and 3 in the conclusion. However, if you think about it, that premise 2 that I just read is quite controversial. And in fact, it's not clear how psychology could go about verifying it. The 4th premise that I put in brackets fills another logical gap. Whether it's true or not, I'm not sure. It reads, nothing unnatural is ever needed as a contributing cause to an abnormal brain episode. That's controversial, right? Naturalists believe it, but that's rather my point. And down at the bottom I say, propositions 2 and 4, the ones doing a lot of heavy lifting in this argument, themselves are, I don't think, verifiable propositions of psychology or of any science. They sort of transcend that. They make claims above that. They're more like philosophical claims. And I think they are philosophical presuppositions from naturalism, specifically naturalistic scientific method, not necessarily the verifiable conclusions of any particular science. So if my conclusion is right there, that propositions 2 and 4 are not verifiable propositions themselves of psychology, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with the position that I originally suggested in the beginning. Correlations just aren't enough either way. They don't lend support to the naturalist. They don't lend support to the supernaturalist. At most what they do is they prevent supernaturalism from simplistically saying, well, if a person is undergoing an abnormal experience that they report as religious, and boy, that brain is really doing something weird, therefore it must be God as the cause. That suffers logical gaps as well. I don't do a version of that, but you could sort of imagine a mirror image parallel argument for the opposite conclusion, that an external God is needed, but it would have to have unnaturalistic, non-naturalistic tacit premises as well, which means you're sort of worried about a begging the question situation either way. In other words, you would already have to presuppose that you know that there is a supernatural being